Hey guys, welcome to the Babbling Pastor's Podcast. How are you doing, guys? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. This month we are going to be. I'm gonna stop that music real quick. I guess we are going to be talking about a wide range of church issues. This specific episode starting us off sort of as the launching pad into that. Also, I didn't introduce myself in case you're new here. My name is Michael.
And I'm Rob. And by launching pad, you're really making it seem to the audience like this is going to be some sort of rocket ship.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it going to be that big? Maybe.
Well, we're going to be talking about denominations in general.
The subject matter is going to be pretty controversial, right? I mean, it's at least it has been.
Yeah. We're going to be specifically talking about the state of denominations using the Southern Baptist Convention as well as the Methodist Church as sort of precursors of that. I don't know if that's even what you want to call it. Definitely talking about them in regards to the effect they have on the wider church, I suppose. So that being said, let's kind of hop into that a little bit. So at the time of this recording, I suppose we should make note that this is we're recording this on the 15th of June.
Yeah.
And yesterday was specifically the Southern Baptist. I think it was like the second day of their convention. I don't know a lot about this.
It was the big day.
Yeah, it was the vote for the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and they. I guess we'll get into that here in a minute. But the idea was that the Southern Baptist Convention is very split, as is the Methodist Church in general as well. We'll be talking a little bit about them in this episode, and then as we kind of go on as well. And I think in general, denominations, the state of denominations, give us a pretty good indicator. And the reason I wanted to do the first episode on this is that they give us a pretty good indicator of where the church is going and like the hot button issues within the church in general. And what we see within the SBC, for example, is a pretty divided denomination. And then what we see within the Methodist Church is the same thing, but it's like a totally different reason it's divided. So, so we have a lot of division within the church at large, but specifically looking at those two denominations particularly. Do you think, it's an interesting question for you, do you think that that's could be true of the church at large within America, or do you think those are sort of just two denominations that just can't seem to get along?
No, in fact, I think that it's so there obviously is more than one motivation typically for divisive things that happen. Some of those motivations are going to be like selfish ones, right? I want to be right, and so sometimes I'll argue something to just for the sake of arguing, and so that I can be proven right. But I think one of the things that even causes denominations in the first place is that we all do care about truth. And so if the moment that, there's a lot of talk in recent years about the church's need to unite, right? Francis Chan has actually been a big proponent of that in recent years. And this need that we all have to run to unity and put the things that we disagree on the shelf, because the world is, the way that it is, and it needs the church, a united church. But for denominations to end effectively and come together and unite, we would all have to stop caring about what's true. because that's what causes the differences, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can certainly have differences of personality, if you will, or differences of interpretation, or differences of practicality, how church polity works, that sort of thing. You can certainly have those differences and be brother and sister in Christ, right? The church in Corinth functioned probably a bit differently, or had a different flavor than the church in Ephesus, right? Like they're the same church, but it was probably just a bit different. I do think that one of the I think that one of my fears is something that you already alluded to, and that is that so those are the two largest denominations in the world, in the church world. I just looked up, the SBC has 47,530 churches going down, and the United Methodist Church, at least right now, has 32,000 churches. So they're the two largest evangelical church denominations in the world. And I know at least the Southern Baptist Convention wouldn't call themselves a denomination, but they are functionally. And the problem with that is it tends to be historically accurate that as the SBC goes, as the United Methodist Church goes, as these larger, more public denominations go, so go the rest of the smaller things, slowly but surely. And so that's one of the concerns that I have. And I think that the reasons for the divisiveness at its root is the same thing in both of those two denominations, but certainly are different issues, different actual issues, if you want to put it that way, I guess. But
yeah. Well, and I think one of the things you said, I think that's really helpful is that normally, and I've seen this acknowledged other places as well, which is sort of, especially for the Southern Baptist, is that it sort of is a precursor for what other denominations will typically kind of follow suit in regards to kind of what they do and what they say. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily like totally true, because the United Methodist Church would look at the Southern Baptists and be like, you're really behind. Like you're so far behind. But in general, like you said, because they have so much influence in regards to how many churches they have, there are certain things that obviously influence the local church a lot. And it does seem to cause, and this is what I've seen online. Now, online isn't necessarily obviously a temperature gauge for reality. In fact, online, most of the time, it's just the loudest people aren't necessarily, the ones that are representing everyone. But there does seem to be a pretty stark divide within what I would consider a more conservative or more traditionalist view of how the church should be ran versus a more, I wouldn't say liberal, in the proper sense of the term, but more like maybe seeker sensitive, I would say, perhaps, or evangelistic. I don't know if that would be the word. That might be a word you would use in regards to that there seems to be like a very stark divide between, hey, these are the things we need to stick to, versus, hey, these aren't as important issues. So like I one of the things that came up the other day that I thought was really interesting, I don't know how up on it you are, like there was a vote to disfellowship Saddleback Church from the SBC, and because they had ordained 2 women pastors. And one of the things that came up during this motion that was apparently made, and again, I am so not in the know of how things are done in the SBC, so this is just me viewing it from the outside.
Yeah.
But basically, that had already been brought up, and they decided that apparently there's a lot of committees, I guess, in the Southern Baptist Convention. Like there's a committee for everything. Carpet color, who can go to the bathroom when, like it's the whole thing. And so the committee apparently had decided that they would not disfellowship Saddleback Church based upon their ordination of 2 women, because they had to define what the word pastor meant in regards to that title versus the office, I think is the way they put it. And so now the SBC for the next year is going to look into the word pastor and find out what it means based upon the Baptist faith and message, and if that would apply. So that was one of the things that happened yesterday, and that was one of like the bigger splitting points. Was I can feel like you have something to say about this, but this is one of the splitting points that was really like this big, as far as I could tell on Twitter, it was a very big deal because some people were like, this isn't, why are we splitting hairs? And other people were like, this isn't splitting hairs. I didn't even know that Saddleback Church was like part of the SBC. And so for me, the fact that you want to disfellowship them on that and not the plethora of other things that Rick Warren etc. did, I feel like there's a lot of other issues you could pick there other than women's ordination. But that's the one they picked. But that just sort of, just as one example of many, I think demonstrates how one of the largest, what is it, associations? It's not a denomination, right? It's like what do they call themselves?
The Southern Baptists?
Yeah.
Just, it's a convention.
Convention.
So it's an association of churches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that demonstrates just like how not on the same page the church in general is, by using that as like a litmus test of just one of the largest convention of churches in America. That just goes to show you're like, man, you guys can't get on the same page on what that means. Like the state of the church and church denominations it's in trouble. It's in trouble big time.
Yeah. And so this is, the Southern Baptist is like the perfect picture of American politics in church.
I can see that.
The way that it functions is very, so it doesn't function directly like American politics necessarily. Like they don't have a House and a Senate. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is you really see very plainly people playing political games. And I mean out in the open in obvious ways that, some people will acknowledge to their credit. But that many people just pretend like it's not there, or continue to wear the blinders intentionally and not want to acknowledge that there's something going on there. But the reason that I'm so concerned about all of this is that now, so another denomination that made headlines really in recent years is the ELCA in the Lutheran Church. Is a wing of the Lutheran Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA, and they are ones that have in recent years they've gone very liberal, unbiblical, essentially. I couldn't in good conscience even attend an ELCA church, just because it began with female pastors serving as lead pastors and the whole thing. So however you want to define it, and then, but that quickly morphed into being homosexual affirming, right? And of course, we shouldn't have to, but we need to distinguish. That doesn't mean that I'm against homosexuals. I'm against their lifestyle and their sin, as I am against every other lifestyle and sin that is contrary to the Word of God. And so, even things that I find in myself, right? We hate our own sin. So there's a distinction there, right? But to to affirm that lifestyle, so that's something that they've essentially said, well, this isn't sin anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was a thing, and then it became, oh well, now we're affirming pastors in homosexual relationships. Oh well, now and then they made headlines last year in the world headlines, really, as the first transgender pastor or bishop.
I think I saw that.
Was part of the ELCA, the Lutheran Church in America. So that is another denomination that has gone crazy. Now there are hints in the PCA, the Presbyterian Church in America, that they're at the beginning stages. Hopefully that can be kicked in the butt, but they're at the beginning stages of beginning to struggle with some of this, more unbiblical thinking. The Southern Baptist Convention, and the reason that I had the reaction that I did is because it sounds just like the politics game to say, well, what is the definition of pastor according to not according to the scriptures? That's not what we're going to say, but according to the Baptist faith and message. And I realize that that's their statement of faith, and that needs to happen. But why would the public statement not be according to the scriptures? What is the role of a pastor? What is that office that is to be held by men? I mean, and we can talk about that at some point, but that's just in the scriptures, right? And so why is that plea or idea not? Why is it not? Let's look this up according to the scriptures, and why is it only? Let's be concerned with the Baptist faith and message, and make sure that he's not breaking any rules, any of our rules, regardless if he might be breaking God's rules. That's not important, right? They're never going to vote him off because he's huge.
Listen, it's the largest church, I believe, in the SBC.
Yeah, he's huge. Yeah, and I think it's funny that. So I didn't keep up with it really until early this morning. And I thought it was funny that you mentioned that, because I didn't know any of that happened with Saddleback. But I did hear already that Rick Warren got like mic time and was able to essentially preach a little bit or whatever he wanted to do, And he, from what I hear, and I didn't see it.
So I watched the video. Yeah.
Okay. So from what I hear, there was a lot of, which is typical of Rick Warren, right? There was a whole lot of preaching about how good Rick Warren is and Saddleback Church and what all of his accomplishments are. And look at all the trophies on my shelf, which is typical Warren, right? Purpose-driven life for myself. So I really struggle with him, but yeah.
No, well, and it was. So I don't know a whole lot about Rick Warren other than the Purpose-Driven Life. I did do a sermon review on him once. The sermon was terrible. So I mean, that's why I was like, you want to go after him about women ordination, I suppose that's what you can do, but there's a lot more issues there. But yeah, he got up and he talked about how many churches they had planted, how many pastors they had trained, how long he had been in ministry. It sounded very much like a speech of like, hey, I know you guys want to kick me out, but look at all these cool things we did. And that's why I appreciate being a Southern Baptist, because I was able to do all of these amazing things because, I think the exact words he used were, me and my wife were able to build this church as big as it is and do all of these things because you guys, I was part of this denomination. There was no mention of Christ doing it. There was no mention of God, empowering, them to do that. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear that Mike, I know there's a lot of politics and I'm sure it's a lot deeper than I'm aware of, but yeah, he had a pretty good 2.5 minute speech that was about, how great Saddleback was. Now he's retiring. I think next year somebody else takes over. They actually had to do an investigation into the guy that's taking over because there were some sexual abuse claims about him, and he was cleared of that, I guess. But there's a bunch of stuff on him. I mean, all these denominations we're talking about, specifically the stated church denominations, almost all of them, though I would say the SBC might be the outlier here, all of them are splitting or have disagreements specifically on sexuality and homosexuality. That's just the case. That's not because we're recording this in June. It's just that's the case, is that the Methodist Church split into the Global Methodist Church because of LGBTQ plus stuff. The PCA has done the same thing. Apparently that wing of the Lutheran Church did the same thing. And I bring that up because the guy that's apparently taking over for Rick Warren, there were some videos that were put out where he did a series on homosexuality, and he's of the mind that from the clips I saw, that it's not I don't want to misquote him, but basically he doesn't have a hard stance on it, essentially. So people's concern is that you're not disfellowshipping Saddleback Church based on women ordination, but there's a lot of other issues there that the largest church in the Southern Baptist Convention, the pastor that will be leading it, is holding positions that are problematic at best. Yeah. And so then you have all these denominations that are clearly splitting or close to splitting. And the SBC isn't splitting because one is not a denomination, but they're not at this point splitting into another convention, if we want to use proper terminology. But it is confusing, I think, to the outside world. Like, apparently, I can't confirm this, but a lot of the reports I saw from reporters on Twitter were like, there were more reporters at the Southern Baptist Convention this year than ever before because of all of the tension, because of all of the politics that were at play. Like, because apparently if Barber, I think is his name, won, like, the SBC continues down its like slide, and if Tom Askell won, then the conservatives took over and the world is ending. And so there were
God forbid we care about his word, right?
so there was a lot of people watching apparently what was happening at this particular convention because of what has happened at all the other conventions. I was actually very happy to hear. I mean, for those of you that listen that may not know, I'm part of the Wesleyan Church, and ours is an itty little bitty convention compared to everyone else's. But at least this year they reaffirmed the whole God ordained men and women in marriage situation and all of the other essentials that I would say are important. But the only reason I was even concerned about that was because of everything else that's happening in all the other denominations. So to sort of kind of, I guess, start wrapping this particular one up, because there's only so much we can talk about in general here. What do you think? Well, one, do you think that outside of the church, anybody even cares about denominations? But two, do you think the direction that most denominations are taking, and I think this is pretty much a give me question, but do you think it can be, is it reversible, I suppose? Is there a way to course correct what we're doing, what we see in all of these different denominations?
Oh, man. So do I think that people outside of the church care? That's the first question about. So I mean, I think that they do in some respect.
Okay.
Not in the same way that like you and I would care about it, but I think that the people outside of the church look at the church through the lenses of the world, right? And so there's already an issue of seeing it clearly or seeing it for what it actually is that isn't there. But I think they care in so much as they have heard, through our whole generation, at least at the beginning of it, we began to hear the hypocrisy thing, right? So from the world standpoint, the church is supposed to be about this or this or this, and here's what we see, right? Oh, the SBC and sexual abuse scandals or whatever, right? Like this is the stuff that they see because that's what the news, the secular news is going to dive on. And so I think they care about it in so much as the way that things are covered tend to confirm to them that, it's just
gotcha. That's a good point. Yeah,
corruption, right? I don't think they care about it in the sense that we got to do something about this. I mean, obviously that's not an issue. In fact, I would say even if only subconsciously, it's really a cheering on in the world of seeing the church crumble. At least what is visibly looks like the church crumbling from their perspective. Second question, can anything be done to reverse it? Is that what the second question was?
Like, do you think, I mean, I know the complications, every denomination is different, but just in general.
Yeah, every denomination is different. And I mean, I don't know is the short answer. I think that the only chance that it has of being corrected is like yesterday, the chance that it gets corrected stands with, okay, well, um, either either vote in Tom Askell, right, or go home now and pray that this other guy reads his Bible, right? Like, I don't know him, but clearly he's known enough by those around the Southern Baptist Convention, and so is there a way to turn those are the ships that we've been talking about are really big ships, right? I mean, it's people who are Bible believing, standing on Scripture by that standard, right? Those people need to stand up and stop just watching the train wreck. That's the way that you stop something like that or turn it around. However, here's the conclusion that I have anyway. I think that either way, what you're going to see are people who are more about, so people not acting like the church is supposed to act biblically. Or if Tom Askell wins, you're going to see those people begin to split off from the Southern Baptist Convention. If this guy wins and they continue to go down the sort of critical race theory, whatever road, you're going to see more conservatives. There were 1.1 million members that left the Southern Baptist Convention in the past 3 years. So you're going to see that continue to happen. And more conservative denominations formed through that. So either way, there's a split, and I think it's bigger than denominations. I think it's culture wide.
Ideological.
Yeah, because we're seeing postmodernism dictate a lot of things. Everyone has their own truth, and it's not this, obviously. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point on the ideological split within denominations. Well, you haven't really seen, if you're looking at American church history specifically, you haven't seen any real great divides within denominations past probably the Methodist divide between Free and United. That would probably be the last bigger denominational split that I'm aware of. But that's just my stream. I'm sure probably, well, the PCA and PCUSA also split. So maybe that was probably more the recent one, probably, I would say. But what I think you're right. What you're going to start seeing is there will be what hasn't happened probably, well, what isn't happening yet in the SBC is what you have seen in the United Methodist Church, where the United Methodist Churches basically said, there is no way we're getting this back because it's just too rampant within the denomination. And then they split off and make a global Methodist Church off from the United Methodist Church and basically just say, let that thing burn to the ground then, because they're just like, the sense that I got from reading some articles about that was the real sense of like, we let it go too long and there really is no getting it back at this point. So the only viable option is a split off, because within that particular denomination, the LGBTQ ideology was so spread that there was no way they were ever going to be able to, they, at least from what their perspective, from what I read, within the next decade, there was no way they were going to be able to sway that another way. And they felt that their man time and their power and their money would be better spent just in a new denomination with like-minded individuals. Now, that doesn't appear to be what's happening within the SBC yet. All of the stuff I saw from people that would be the ones that would split off said that they're not doing that. They're going to stick around another year, because Barber, from what I understand, is the kinder. I don't know about him at all. Basically, I know about as much about him as I do about Tom Askell, but Barber basically is, from what I understand from Twitter, from both sides, is basically a guy that doesn't rock the boat. He's very like middle of the line. Like some people call him vanilla. Like it was just sort of like, he's not somebody that's going to cause waves. He's just not. He's very much like a middle ground peacemaker kind of guy. And so the basic consensus was there's no reason to split right now because he's not a radical individual. He's not going to purposefully try to push people out. So that I would say that what happened in the SBC, or what happened rather in the United Methodist Church, isn't going to happen in the SBC yet. But like you said, there's such large boats, these denominations, that there's no way to turn the rudder in a really quick way. So what you do see, for example, with the United Methodist Church, is people like, hey, we're just going to split off on all these lifeboats and we're going to go over here because this boat has a lot of holes and we're just not going to stick around.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. But to be honest with you, what I see happening is just church, forgetting about denominations, church-wide. I think that we're going to continue to see more of the invisible church become visible and obvious, and those that are simply goats who are playing church or posing as church or have other motives or whatever are going to continually be more obvious. Mm-hmm. Like Tim Keller, for instance, right?
I don't know a lot about him, but yeah.
Doesn't believe in a worldwide flood, doesn't believe in all sorts of things and that Scripture is clear about. Advocate for all things woke. Just we're gonna see things that before it's like, oh my gosh, right? I read Radical, David Platt's awesome, right? Or whatever it is. We're gonna see things like that continue to, and not making the claim that those guys aren't Christians or whatever. That's not my place, but there's certainly, we're gonna see a lot more of people who claim to be Christian or Christian leaders even who are walking away essentially from pretty clear things in the Word of God.
Gotcha. All right, so we'll wrap this episode up specifically on the state of denominations, and then the next few episodes we'll be talking about, in particular, abuse and more specific things within denominations in particular. But I think we've pretty much surmised the state of church denominations is not in a pretty place right now. It's in a very state of flux, in which I think if the SBC would be sort of a litmus test for me from what I saw yesterday, in general, not all denominations, but in general, needs to be a lot of defining of terminology and a lot of firmer foundation set on terminology that clearly, if not said, it becomes pretty problematic. So hopefully
All right.
What's good? Yeah. Just sort of have an audio play.
I accidentally hit some video. I don't know what happened there. All right.
But anyway, so I think that's the state. So guys, hopefully you'll tune in the next couple episodes. We're going to be diving more into the more specific aspects of this, of these denominations, and of kind of how those issues affect the local church a lot more specifically. So hopefully tune in for that. We'll see you next week.
Later. Bye.